The funeral had ended hours ago, but the house still smelled faintly of roses and pine, a lingering reminder of the day that had promised closure, but delivered betrayal. I stepped carefully down the grand staircase, my black dress clinging to me like a shadow of grief, the hem brushing the polished wood that once gleamed under my husband's meticulous care. My son's voice reached me first, light, arrogant. The sort that makes your blood thicken. Don't expect a dime from Dad's, a 92 million. He said, barely looking up from of stone. The words landed with the weight of stones. I paused mid-step, gripping the banister, inhaling the faint scent of roses that had accompanied me from the chapel. His tone, so casual, so assured, made me feel like I was a ghost in the home I had built, a shadow among the living. When he finally looked up, his face paled, his eyes darting toward me as if I were some inconvenient apparition. She's still breathing. Thought she'd be gone by now. He muttered under his breath, barely audible. But the words pierced the silence. I climbed the rest of the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, each heartbeat a drum of defiance. The dining hall was alive with murmurs, laughter, and the soft scrape of shoes against the marble. My family had returned mourn, but to feast and divide. I paused at the threshold, watching them scatter through my life like vultures over carrion. Neon sticky notes adorned furniture and heirlooms, marking their claims. Mine. 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 My grandson waved a phone in the air, blueprints open, measuring lines blinking on the screen. Spayroom, wine-tasting nook. Remodel the kitchen. The words floated through the air, carried on careless laughter. None of them looked at me, none offered a chair, none paused in the chaos of their inheritance party. My daughter-in-law appeared with champagne flutes, her smile wide, her voice sweet with irony. We're celebrating Dad's legacy, she said. He built an empire. And now we get to carry it forward. I stood silently in the mudroom, facing a mop bucket and a plate of cold chicken. A meal abandoned by neglect and arrogance. The scent of the house shifted from roses to dust and mothballs, to the stench of entitlement. The voices carried on. This house smells like mothballs and death, someone said. Strip the wallpaper. Gut the kitchen. The sticky notes multiplied as if my life could be parceled into fluorescent squares, each labeled with someone else's greed. I did not speak. I did not move. I reached into my sweater pocket, my fingers curling around the crisp edges of a memorandum I had kept secret for 15 years. It was notarized, dated, declaring me co-founder and early investor of the family trust. No one had asked, no one had suspected. Back then, when the company teetered on the edge of bankruptcy, it wasn't lawyers or accountants who saved it, it was me. Every heirloom jewelry, every emerald necklace, every gold bangle, every brooch, all sold quietly, all wired directly into the company account. My husband never knew the source, or at least he never told anyone. I whispered to him then, use it. But don't let them know it came from me. I watched my family pick apart memories, possessions, and art with glee, oblivious to the truth. My grandson's neon stickers plastered my life like trophies. My granddaughter's measuring app scanned corners, as if the walls themselves could be remodeled to erase me. They laughed, joked, and whispered cruelly about my supposed obsolescence. God, she's half dead already, one of them quipped. Let her rot with the memories. Can we keep her pension checks if we forward her mail? I swallowed the cold chit against my teeth, and held my silence. But inside, my pulse was a drum. A quiet fury. They did not know, could not know that I had been the spine of the empire they claimed. I had saved everything, quietly and visibly. And now I was watching them feast upon the illusion of a life they had never built. Hours passed. They moved through the house like vandals, dragging suitcases, marking furniture, measuring walls. I rose, knees aching, and stepped to the small kitchen window. Outside, the roses my husband had planted were wilting, forgotten. No one had watered them. No one had noticed. And then I walked back inside, my mind tracing a plan I had long rehearsed in silence. The next morning, the lawyer called. Mr. Alden, a steady presence through decades of family and corporate turmoil, answered my quiet summons without question. We met in his office. Walls lined with books and certificates, polished wood reflecting the light from tall windows. One by one, I laid out the documents: the joint trust certificate, my name alongside my husband's, co-executor, co-founder, the investment agreement from the bank, notarized, showing my discreet infusion of funds that had saved the company, and the bundle of handwritten pages, yellowed, edges curled. The original IPO proposal penned under a pseudonym. I remembered that night cleanly, my husband pacing, a glass of scotch untouched, the board rejecting every draft. I sat at the kitchen table while the house slept, writing through the night, fingers stained with ink, mailing the finished proposal anonymously. The company survived. Millions gained, my contribution erased, my sacrifice hidden behind the curtain anonymity. Mr. Alden leaned closer, eyes narrowing, comparing the handwritten drafts to the submitted pseudonym, calling in a handwriting analyst from Stanford. 2 hours of meticulous examination, loops and pressure points, pauses and strokes, the verdict 100% match. The intellectual property, the IPO model, the framework for a multi-million-dollar investment strategy, all mine. The realization settled in, cold and exhilarating. The royalties, the residual that had been mine all along. Millions, quietly accruing, a testament to years of invisible labor. I did not want the money. I wanted my voice, my acknowledgement. The proof that I had existed in the room even when they pretended I had not. The will reading was a performance. My son Joseph sat with polished confidence, his wife whispering, his children detached, practicing signatures on legal pads. Mr. Allen began, emphasizing the word. Revised. Folders were passed. Pages turned, and then the small silver recorder was switched on. My husband's voice, steady and measured, filled the room. If my son ever speaks ill of his mother, deduct $1 million per word, he said. Silence descended like a physical weight. He continued, each phrase a dagger to the ego of the entitled. Statements recorded, verified, transcribed, deductions tallied. The inheritance for Joseph plummeted, leaving only a fraction, a small fragment of what he had expected. My voice, quiet but steady, broke the silence. It was Dad's wish, I said, and they finally looked. Really looked. The folders, deeds, portfolios, letters handed to me. The rightful heir, the keeper of the legacy. My husband's handwritten apology, the confession of recognition too long delayed, the final acknowledgement of my invisible labor. They could not erase me any longer. The intellectual property, the royalties, the proof of authorship, all lay in my hands, tangible and undeniable. I walked through the house afterward, room by room, peeling off sticky notes, reclaiming the furniture, the memories, the objects that had been mine before anyone dared claim them. The grand piano, the wedding phonome, the armchair with his initials, the rocking chair where I had comforted generations, all restored to their rightful place. The house exhaled with me, finally still, finally mine. Outside, I knelt by the small rose bush, a single brittle stem surviving years of neglect. I poured water slowly, listening to the dry soul drink, whispering promises of renewal. We'll bloom again, I said. Because we would, not because they believed it. Months later the house sold. Not out of vengeance, but liberation. I moved to a small penthouse near the sea, sunlight spilling through wide windows, the hush of waves my constant companion. The royalties continued, quiet, sufficient. But I did not need all of it. I established a foundation, modest, for women who had been erased, unrecognized, invisible architects of legacies that bore someone else's name. A wooden sign hung outside my front door, hand-carved on the oak my husband and I had planted. It read, "This house was funded by a burden. Enjoy the silence." A small smile tugged at my lips each time the mailman chuckled. Inside, I kept only essentials, a few memories, a single drawing from a grandson that said, "You think better than Google." I did. I had survived. I had reclaimed. I had been buried alive, yet unbroken. And every night, when the sun dipped beneath the horizon, when the waves whispered against the shore, I allowed myself to remember, to breathe, to feel the quiet, unstoppable strength of a woman who had built an empire in silence, and finally at last, had reclaimed her place at the table. The penthouse overlooked the restless sea, its waves rolling with the persistence of time, indifferent to the tragedies and triumphs of a single life. I moved through each morning slowly, deliberately, tasting the quiet. The curtains were drawn to let the sunlight pool in golden patches across the hardwood floor, and for the first time in decades, I felt free to stretch, to breathe, to reclaim space that had been denied me. But freedom was not a gift, it was a careful orchestration, a war won quietly, strategically. Each document I had secured, each letter, each notarized statement, was not just proof of my labor. It was armor against the whispers of family, who might yet try to undo me. I kept a drawer in the bedroom, a secret fortress, filled with files and digital drives that carried decades of proof. No one would touch them. No one would challenge me. I had learned to anticipate their moves before they even dreamed of making them. Even so, nights were long. Shadows gathered at the corners of the penthouse. Memories lingering. I remembered the whispers at the funeral, my son's careless arrogance. The way my daughter-in-law had smiled while circling over my life as if I were prey. The betrayal had not been a single act, it had been years of neglect. Of minimizing my role, of dismissing my voice. I remembered their laughter as they divided the furniture, measuring the walls as if my life were just square footage. And yet, despite the bitterness, I refused to let resentment consume me. Anger was a weapon, yes, but only if wielded with precision. The first few weeks after the move were a period of meticulous organization. I cataloged my belongings, photographing them, logging their provenance, and noting their emotional weight. Each item became a talisman, a reminder that though I had been erased, nothing I had created could truly be taken from me. The piano, the photographs, the journals, each one was a thread in the fabric of my life. And I began to write again, fingers tracing ink onto paper, documenting every injustice, every act of quiet heroism, every sacrifice made for a family that never acknowledged it. I also began connecting with the women I had once only admired from afar. Women whose brilliance had been overshadowed by husbands, fathers, sons. They were engineers, investors, architects, writers, women who had built empires in silence, invisible to the history books and the headlines. My foundation became a gathering place, both physical and digital, a network of mentorship and empowerment. We shared strategies, stories, advice, and sometimes tears. It was in these connections that I felt a thrill I had not known in years: solidarity, recognition, power. Not the kind that comes from money, but from the knowledge that we had shaped the world in ways no one had acknowledged. One day, as I reviewed the legal documents for a new investment I was considering, my phone buzzed with a text from Joseph. His message was short, clipped, almost apologetic. "Mom, we need to talk. Can we meet?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, remembering the pale face, the arrogance, the entitlement. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let it vanish like the smoke of their greed. And yet I was curious. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted to see the measure of the man who had underestimated me. The meeting was arranged in a neutral office downtown, glass walls and minimalist furniture, a place devoid of history or emotional leverage. Joseph arrived, suit pressed tight, perfect, but his eyes betrayed unease. His wife hovered nearby, arms crossed, lips tight. My grandson watched from the corner, phone in hand, measuring the air as if calculating my worth in pixels. I was wrong. Joseph began, and I allowed myself a small, careful smile. Wrong about what? I asked, voice steady, quiet, with no trace of the bitterness I felt. He swallowed, running a hand through his hair. About everything. About underestimating you. About thinking you wouldn't have the means, the leverage, the knowledge. About thinking this empire was mine to inherit. I didn't understand. I studied him, silent, letting his words settle in the sterile air between us. Apologies were not enough. Recognition had to be backed by action. "Do you know why this house, the company, the investments, all of it, is in order?" I asked. "Not because of Dad. Not because of you. But because I built it, quietly, while you were dreaming of inheritance. He flinched slightly, the truth landing heavier than I imagined. He had never considered me a force, only a placeholder, a background figure to adorn his father's legacy. "I see that now," he said, and I nodded, letting him feel the weight of those words. "You need to understand one thing," I said. "Respect is earned, not given. Recognition is not a gift. It's a consequence of your actions. You failed at both." He lowered his gaze, ashamed, and I allowed a moment of satisfaction, not cruelty, but justice. "I will mentor you," I continued, "if you are willing. Not because I owe you anything, but because understanding is the first step to change. But you will follow my terms, not your assumptions." The weeks that followed were tense. Joseph attempted to prove himself, shadowing my work at the foundation, attending meetings, listening, learning. His wife remained skeptical, but slowly, they observed the meticulous precision, the quiet command I'd over the network of women, investors, and strategists I now influenced. My grandson, the calculating boy, began to approach me for advice on his projects, and I realized that legacy was not just about money. It was about influence, knowledge, and the ability to move unseen pieces into place. The empire I had saved was no longer just a company or a house, it was a network, a foundation, a structure built on resilience, intellect, and courage. And now, with the legal power fully secured, I began to invest in causes I had once only dreamed of. Scholarships for young women in STEM, mentorship programs for underrepresented entrepreneurs, micro-loans for women in developing countries. Each success was a silent victory, a ripple that no one could trace directly back to me, yet one that shaped the world. As months turned to years, I became both invisible and indispensable, a shadow presence in boardrooms, conferences, and philanthropic gatherings. Recognition came not as a headline, but as invitations, connections, and influence. I had learned that power wielded quietly lasts longer than power flaunted. And still at night, when the penthouse was silent and the waves rolled endlessly below, I allowed myself the luxury of reflection. I remembered the funeral, the betrayal, the laughter, the sticky notes, the measuring apps. I remembered the suffocating sensation of being erased, overlooked, dismissed. And I realized that survival was not just enduring. It was anticipating, planning, and executing with a patience honed over decades. The strength I had cultivated was not raw muscle or fury. It was calm, deliberate, and unshakable. One evening, a storm rolled in over the sea, rain beating against the windows like a drum of destiny. I sat at my desk, pen in hand, writing letters to the women I had mentored, updating them on projects, celebrating their triumphs. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room, casting shadows that danced on the walls. I felt a thrill, a pulse of power, an affirmation that the storms I had weathered, both literal and figurative, had strengthened me rather than broken me. The foundation hosted its first international conference in a historic hall overseas, bringing together innovators, investors, and activists from across the globe. As I spoke to the audience, detailing strategies for empowerment, investment, and mentorship, I noticed the subtle nods of respect. The recognition that my words carried authority. It was the acknowledgement I had been denied a home, now multiplied by hundreds, thousands, resonating across borders and time zones. And yet, even amidst success, there was the constant echo of the past. Family still lurked in the periphery, their ambitions and greed occasionally brushing against mine. But I no longer feared them, nor did I indulge in petty revenge. My power was quiet, strategic. Each move they made was anticipated, every claim neutralized. I had built systems that protected my legacy and amplified it, ensuring that no one could ever undermine me again. The years continued, and with each passing one, my influence expanded. The foundation grew, investments multiplied, and the network of empowered women became a force that could not be ignored. I received letters from women who had never met me, thanking me for creating opportunities, for validating their worth, for being a living testament that strength, intelligence could overcome erasure. At night, I often walked along the terrace of the penthouse, The city lights glimmering below, the sea stretching endlessly beyond. I thought of the empire I had saved, the family that had doubted me, and the quiet victories that had reshaped my life. And I understood deeply that being buried alive was not the end. It was an awakening. The empire was no longer just a legacy of wealth, it was a legacy of resilience, strategy, and empowerment. And in that realization, I found peace, purpose, and the unwavering certainty that I had not only survived, but had transformed every attempt to bury me into the foundation of my greatest triumph. The conference hall was alive with energy, a symphony of ambition, intellect, and hope. I walked onto the stage with measured steps, my posture impeccable, my gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. Every eye in the room carried expectation. Some were skeptical, some reverent, but all were attentive. This was no longer about proving myself to my family. This was about proving the possibilities of women who had been dismissed, underestimated, or silenced. As I spoke, I shared not only strategies and methodologies but stories, my story though selectively. I spoke of challenges, of perseverance, of the quiet battles that often go unnoticed. I spoke of being dismissed, underestimated and erased, and how those very obstacles had forged an unshakable strength. There were murmurs in the audience, the kind that signal recognition. I felt a rush not of vanity but of fulfillment. For the first time, I was seen not as a shadow of someone else's legacy, but as the architect of my own. After the presentation, a young woman approached me, her hands trembling slightly as she held a notebook. "Your words, they mean everything," she said. "I thought I was alone, that no one understood the struggles we face. But seeing you, it changes everything." Her eyes shone with tears, and I realized that my journey had ripple effects far beyond my own life. My survival, my careful planning, my victories, these were not mine alone. Meanwhile, Joseph had been observing quietly, learning in ways that formal mentorship could not teach. He had begun to understand not only my intelligence and strategy, but also the moral framework guiding my actions. He saw that power without empathy, without foresight, was fleeting. Slowly, he began to internalize the lessons I had tried to impart, though he would never admit it outright. Back home, I received updates from my foundation. Reports on scholarships awarded, businesses funded, communities impacted. I had created systems so efficient that even my absence could not slow their momentum. It was a legacy that functioned independently, growing organically, empowering others to take initiative, to lead, and to innovate. I realized that the truest measure of power was not control but influence, the ability to inspire, to guide, and to multiply strength across generations. Despite my success, there were moments when the past resurfaced unbidden. A newspaper headline, a casual remark at a dinner, a memory triggered by scent or sound. Each reminder tested my resolve, yet each time I reaffirmed my approach. I had survived not by reacting with fury, but by acting with strategy. I understood that the only true power lay in patience, precision, and the courage to make the hard choices that others could not. It was during one such quiet evening, overlooking the city skyline, that my daughter-in-law's tone changed. A message arrived, polite, careful, almost deferential. "Would like to discuss the future of the company. Your guidance would be appreciated." The words were measured, but I recognized the shift. They were no longer challenging me outright, they were seeking the authority they had once ignored. I agreed to a meeting, not out of necessity but to set boundaries and expectations. The discussion was formal, strategic, and unyielding. I outlined plans for succession, shared insights into expansion, and clarified responsibilities. Every word was deliberate, every expectation clear. By the end, there was no doubt in anyone's mind who held authority, and it was not arrogance, it was clarity born of decades of resilience. Meanwhile, my grandson, once a distant observer, had begun to impress me. He showed curiosity, intelligence, and an eagerness to learn. Under my guidance, he learned not only business acumen but also the values of integrity, foresight, and responsibility. He became a bridge between the family that had tried to undermine me and the empire I had meticulously safeguarded. Years passed, and my influence continued to expand internationally. Partnerships were formed with organizations across continents. Initiatives launched to empower women in sectors traditionally dominated by men, and communities revitalized through strategic investments. I traveled extensively. Yet every journey reinforced the principle I had learned early: visibility was a tool, but discretion was power. My name became respected, even feared in certain circles. Not for flamboyance but for unwavering competence. One day, I received a letter from a woman in a distant country. She described how a small grant from my foundation had transformed her community. How girls were now attending schools they had once been barred from. How young women were starting businesses that would never have existed without support. Her words resonated deeply. This was the culmination of decades of struggle. The tangible manifestation of the empire I had saved, not in money alone, but in lives uplifted, potential realized, and future secured. And yet, the most profound victory remained deeply personal. Joseph had grown, not into a mirror of my strength, but into someone capable of understanding, respecting, and contributing meaningfully. Our relationship, once fraught with tension, had evolved into mutual respect. His wife, initially skeptical, now approached me with honesty, occasionally seeking guidance, and even my grandson began to see me as both mentor and anchor. The family that had once dismissed me could no longer ignore my authority. Yet they were no longer adversaries, they were participants in a legacy that had been carefully constructed, brick by brick. In the quiet moments of reflection, I understood the true depth of what I had accomplished. Being buried alive had been literal and metaphorical. Yet each attempt to suppress me had only strengthened my resolve. The empire I had saved was not merely financial, it was structural, social, and cultural. It was proof that resilience, intelligence, and strategic action could overcome even the most insidious attempts at erasure. And finally, as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I walked along the terrace, feeling the wind on my face, the city lights twinkling below. I thought of the storms endured, the battles fought, the moments of doubt and despair, and I realized that I had not only survived, but had transformed every obstacle into a stepping stone. The empire was secure, the legacy enduring, and I, though once buried alive, stood unbroken, empowered, and triumphant. The foundation continued to thrive. New projects launched monthly, women's empowerment initiatives spreading across continents, scholarships multiplied, mentorship networks strengthened. Every achievement was a testament not only to my perseverance, but to the collective strength of every woman I had empowered. Every life uplifted by careful planning, strategic patience, and unwavering courage. In the end, legacy was not about wealth, nor about the power others sought to impose. It was about creating systems that endured, inspiring those who had been overlooked, and transforming personal triumph into communal strength. I had done more than save an empire, I had redefined it. I had proven that even when buried alive, a life rooted in intelligence, resilience, and purpose could rise, stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. And as I stood on the terrace one final evening, the wind carrying the faint scent of the sea and the distant hum of a city that thrived beneath me, I smiled. The world was vast, challenges unending, but I was ready. Because I had survived the unthinkable, risen above the betrayal, and built an empire that outlived even the fiercest storms. I had been buried alive, yet I remained unbroken. The day began with an unusual calm, the kind of silence that follows long periods of tension. I could feel it in the air, a subtle shift, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. The people who had once doubted me, dismissed me, or sought to undermine my authority were now watching closely. Every move I made carried weight, and I felt the gravity not as a burden, but as a measure of the empire I had safeguarded. My grandson arrived early, eager and determined, clutching notes and ideas. He had grown in confidence and skill, each visit showing more initiative, more understanding of the delicate balance between power and empathy. I reviewed his plans carefully, correcting, guiding, and encouraging. I realized that mentoring him was not simply preparing a successor. It was shaping the future of the family, the business, and the initiatives we had nurtured. The lessons I had fought so hard to learn and teach were now being absorbed and amplified. Joseph entered shortly after, his demeanor measured, respectful. No longer the brash, impatient man who had once ignored my authority, he now carried humility that comes with genuine understanding. We spoke in careful tones, discussing expansion, sustainability, and the long-term vision of the empire. I could see the shift in him. The realization that real power is exercised with foresight and integrity, not merely command. Later that afternoon the board meeting commenced. The room, once charged with tension and subtle antagonism, now held a quiet respect. I presented the next phase of initiatives, from global expansion projects to community empowerment programs. Every word was deliberate, every plan precise. The room responded not with challenge but with engagement. Questions were raised, suggestions offered, and debates held, but the tone had transformed. This was no longer a battle for recognition. This was collaboration under the framework I had established. During a brief pause, I looked around the room and noticed the subtle gestures of acknowledgement, nods, brief smiles, unspoken respect. It was a moment of profound satisfaction. I had not only survived betrayal, but had converted it into a system of loyalty, understanding, and shared purpose. My presence no longer intimidated, it inspired. My legacy was no longer just a shield against adversaries, it was a beacon for those willing to rise. That evening, I walked through the city streets, reflecting on the journey. The memory of the night had been buried alive. Was vivid, yet it no longer carried pain. It had become a foundation, a source of clarity and focus. Every decision I had made since then, every strategy employed, every risk taken, had been informed by that moment. I realized that true survival is not merely enduring, it is transforming adversity into opportunity, despair into vision, and suppression into influence. A letter arrived, sealed and urgent. It was from one of the most influential partners abroad. A group that had once hesitated to engage due to the family conflicts and uncertainties. The message was clear. They recognized the stability and foresight I had brought, and they were ready to commit to partnerships that would expand our reach globally. This was validation not just of business acumen but of the integrity and resilience that had shaped our enterprise. At home, my daughter-in-law approached me quietly, a small smile on her face. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for everything you've done, for the guidance, for making this family stronger." Her words were sincere, and I felt a sense of closure. The tension that had once defined our relationship had softened into mutual respect. It was not a perfect reconciliation. No scars of betrayal disappear entirely, but it was real and it was enough. Later that night, I stood on the terrace, looking out over the lights of the city that now thrived under the framework I had carefully constructed. The wind was gentle, carrying whispers of the countless lives touched, empowered, and uplifted by our initiatives. I thought of the young woman who had once approached me in the conference hall. The communities transformed by scholarships and grants. The women stepping into roles they had never imagined. Each life, each achievement, was a testament to the unyielding spirit that had guided me. I reflected on my journey. The moments of despair, the near betrayals, the painstaking patience required to navigate treacherous waters. And I understood something fundamental. Being buried alive was not simply a metaphor for hardship. It was a crucible, a proving ground for resilience, intelligence, and moral clarity. Those who had tried to bury me had underestimated not my strength but my vision, the ability to see beyond immediate threats, to act strategically, and to build enduring structures that would outlast personal vendettas. The following morning brought a ceremonial gathering, modest yet profoundly symbolic. Leaders from various sectors, representatives of communities, and family members gather witness the formal consolidation of initiatives, the official acknowledgement of leadership, and the celebration of a legacy carefully safeguarded. I spoke briefly, emphasizing unity, responsibility, and the ongoing mission to empower, educate, and innovate. The applause that followed was genuine, not for show but for recognition. My grandson, standing beside me, looked up with awe and determination. "I want to continue what you've built," he said quietly. "I want to make sure it lasts." I smiled, knowing that the future was in capable hands, shaped by lessons forged in fire, tempered by wisdom, and guided by unwavering integrity. As the day concluded, I returned to the terrace, the horizon awash in golden light. The city below was alive, vibrant, and thriving. And I realized that the empire I had saved was more than an accumulation of wealth or power. It was a network of influence, a catalyst for growth, a testament to what can be achieved when courage, strategy, and perseverance converge. I had faced betrayal, attempted erasure, and unimaginable challenges. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and almost broken. Yet here I stood, unbroken, empowered, and triumphant, not because of fortune or title, but because of vision, resilience, and unwavering commitment to a higher purpose. I had been buried alive, yet I had risen. Not only for myself but for the countless lives my actions would touch for generations to come. The night descended gently, the stars emerging one by one. I closed my eyes, feeling the culmination of decades of struggle, strategy, and perseverance. The empire was secure, the legacy enduring, and I, once confined, challenged, and underestimated, stood as a living testament to the power of survival, the strength of resilience, and the unyielding force of purpose. And in that moment, I understood that being buried alive had not been the end, it had been the beginning of a life, a mission, and a legacy that could never be undone. I had been tested beyond measure, yet I had prevailed. I was unbroken, unstoppable, and eternal in the impact I had created. The morning air carried a crispness that hinted at change. I rose early, not from obligation but from habit, from the rhythm of a life honed through decades of vigilance, strategy, and determination. The empire I had saved was no longer a fragile structure threatened by deceit, it had become a living, breathing organism, thriving on the collective dedication of those who now believed in the mission. Yet, in the quiet of the dawn, I found myself reflecting not on power, influence, or legacy, but on the moments that had defined my humanity. I walked through the private gardens, each step deliberate, each breath conscious. The roses, still blooming, seemed to whisper memories of grief and triumph alike. Their fragrance reminded me of the funeral that had set this entire journey in motion, of the moment I realized that life, however fragile, was a vessel for impact. I knelt beside a bed of crimson petals, tracing my fingers across their delicate edges. And I thought of all the women I had mentored, the lives I had touched, and the battles fought in silence and shadow. Later, a delegation from a distant country arrived, seeking guidance and collaboration. They had heard of the initiatives I had pioneered, the educational programs, the healthcare outreach, the empowerment of women and children, and they wanted to replicate the model in their own territories. I welcomed them, but not without caution. Every handshake, every smile, every agreement carried the weight of responsibility. Trust was not freely given, it had to be earned, carefully nurtured. As I spoke, outlining our methodologies and principles, I saw in their eyes the same spark that had driven me to persevere in the darkest hours. It was hope. It was ambition. It was recognition that survival and vision could coexist in the same individual. In the afternoon, I returned to the estate, where family matters demanded attention. My daughter-in-law approached again, this time with a more personal request. She wanted to discuss succession planning, not just for the empire but for the values, ethics, and integrity that must accompany it. I listened carefully, offering guidance without imposing, sharing wisdom without dictating. The conversation was delicate, laced with unspoken tension, yet grounded in mutual respect. For the first time in years, I felt the sense of continuity I had longed for. Not just a continuation of power but a continuation of principle. As evening fell, the city lights flickered to life, reflecting in the waters of the harbor like a constellation brought to earth. I stood at the edge of the balcony, observing the interplay of light and shadow, of history and progress. Each building, each street, each life below carried traces of influence, of decisions made with foresight and courage. I realized that the empire was no longer mine alone, it belonged to every person touched by its reach. Every community strengthened by its vision. It was a living testament to the idea that resilience, intelligence, and morality could coexist in leadership. That night, I received a personal message from an old adversary, the very person who had once orchestrated my near demise. His words were unexpected. A mixture of regret and acknowledgement. He admitted that he had underestimated my resolve. That the structures I had built had not only survived, but had flourished in ways he could not have imagined. The message was brief, yet it carried a weight I had not anticipated. In the quiet of my study, I read and reread it, feeling a sense of closure. Forgiveness was not immediate. Nor was it necessary, but recognition, finally, had come. Later, I attended a gala, organized to honor the achievements of women leaders across industries. The room buzzed with conversation, with ambition, with stories of struggle and triumph. As I walked among the attendees, I realized how far we had come. From a time when women were sidelined, underestimated, and dismissed, to a time when influence, intellect, and resilience were celebrated. I saw in their eyes a reflection of my own journey, and I understood that the empire I had saved was now a platform for countless others to rise. The evening drew to a close, yet I remained for a moment longer, standing beneath the arches of the grand hall, feeling the weight and warmth of history. I thought of the nights spent in fear, of the moments when betrayal had seemed insurmountable, and of the times when survival required more than strength, it required vision, patience, and unwavering moral clarity. I realized that every challenge, every test, every moment of despair had been essential in shaping not only the leader I became, but the person I had chosen to remain. Returning home, I found a quiet note from my grandson. He had spent the day in reflection, planning and writing, inspired by the lessons I had imparted. "I want to be worthy of what you've built," he wrote. I smiled, understanding that this was more than ambition, it was reverence, responsibility, and love intertwined. The legacy would endure because it was rooted in values, not merely wealth or power. Night descended fully, and I stood once more on the terrace. The city sprawled below like a tapestry woven from light and life. I thought of all who had doubted me, all who had tried to bury me in fear, malice, or underestimation. They had failed, not because of luck or timing, but because resilience, intelligence, and purpose cannot be denied. I had been buried alive, yet I had risen. Not simply to reclaim what was mine, but to create something greater than myself, something enduring, transformative, and eternal. And in the stillness of the night, as the stars shimmered with distant brilliance, I understood a truth I had long carried but only now fully embraced, that life, no matter how perilous or unjust, offers the chance to rise, to lead, to impact, and to inspire. And I had done all of that, not in spite of adversity, but because of it. The empire, the legacy, the lives touched, they were proof that being buried alive is never the end, it is the beginning of a story that will echo for generations. The dawn arrived slowly, soft and deliberate, as though the world itself acknowledged the gravity of what had transpired and the calm that now followed. I rose from my bed, not from obligation but from purpose, sensing that this day, unlike any other, would carry a weight beyond mere achievement. The empire I had fought to preserve no longer required my constant vigilance, it had matured, grown resilient under my guidance, and now beckoned me to reflect rather than to maneuver. I walked through the halls of the estate, each portrait, each artifact, each relic a testament to struggle and triumph. I paused before the painting of my late husband, tracing the outline of his face with fingers that had once trembled in grief. "We did it," I whispered, not to the memory of the man who had left me, but to the part of myself that had been forged in fire. In that silence, I felt the echo of battles fought in shadows, the weight of sacrifices made in isolation, and the truth that no one survives such trials unchanged. The morning brought family together, a rare occurrence in recent years. My son, once skeptical, once cruel, now approached with cautious reverence. His eyes carried a mixture of guilt, acknowledgement, and tentative pride. He had witnessed the empire survive, thrive, and transform under my hand, and he could no longer deny the magnitude of the woman he had once underestimated. Our conversation was quiet, careful, yet laden with meaning. Forgiveness was not demanded, but recognition had finally been offered, bridging the chasm of years. My grandson, ever eager and perceptive, approached with a portfolio of ideas, plans, and questions. He wanted to understand not only the mechanics of power but the philosophy of leadership, the ethics of influence, and the subtle art of resilience. I shared with him what no book or institution could teach. Lessons carved from fire, loss, and unwavering principle. I spoke of the necessity to rise above malice, to wield influence with compassion, and to understand that true power is measured not by wealth or territory, but by the lives uplifted and the values preserved. The afternoon carried a different energy. A council of allies, collaborators, and once distant leaders gathered, each acknowledging the transformation of the empire and the role I had played. Not as a solitary conqueror, but as a strategist, a mentor, and a visionary. Their admiration was tempered by respect, their respect by recognition of the trials endured. We discussed expansion, outreach, philanthropy, and innovation. The air buzzed with potential. A palpable sense that what had been safeguarded and rebuilt could now ripple outward, influencing regions, societies, and generations. As evening approached, I retreated to the gardens once more, this time accompanied by my closest confidentes. We walked in quiet contemplation, observing the interplay of light and shadow, life and decay, growth and harvest. The roses, steadfast in their bloom, seemed almost symbolic of the journey, a reminder that even under the weight of adversity, beauty and strength could endure. Conversation flowed, reflecting on the empire's trajectory, the mistakes made, the victories won, and the lives touched along the way. Laughter mingled with solemnity, a testament to the complexity of human experience. Night fell fully, and with it came a rare solitude. I stood on the terrace, gazing at the city sprawled beneath, each light a story, each shadow a challenge overcome. Memories surged, the betrayals, the near deaths, the endless nights of strategy and survival. And yet, these were tempered by moments of triumph, of influence, of love and mentorship. I understood, deeply and irrevocably, that life's most profound victories are not those measured by wealth or control, but by resilience, integrity, and the capacity to uplift others. A soft breeze carried a whisper of promise. I felt, not a sense of finality but of continuity. The empire would endure. My lessons would persist through those I had guided, and the lives impacted would ripple outward in ways impossible to measure. I had been buried alive in countless ways. By betrayal, by doubt, by grief, but I had emerged unbroken, not merely surviving but transforming the world around me. In the quiet hours, I reflected on the true nature of legacy. It is not monuments or titles that endure, but influence, values, and the courage to act with integrity when no one is watching. It is in the lives changed, the doors opened, the lessons passed on, and the resilience cultivated. I had given my all to preserve, protect, and elevate, and in return, I found a peace born not of ease, but of purpose fulfilled. Before retiring, I penned a final note to my family. It was not a directive, nor a warning, nor a claim of ownership. It was a message of hope, encouragement, and responsibility, led with strength, wisdom, and compassion. Remember that the measure of our lives is in the impact we leave on others. Guard what we have built, and continue to rise, even when the world seeks to bury you. The empire is yours, as it is mine, as it is ours. As sleep claimed me, I felt a profound serenity. The empire, the legacy, the battles touched, the battles fought and won, all converged into a singular truth: survival is not the end. Resilience is not a choice, it is a mandate. And the capacity to rise is the defining mark of those who refuse to be buried by circumstance. And so, I rested unbroken, undiminished, and infinitely alive. ready to awaken to a world transformed by the courage, vision, and heart of a woman who had refused to be defeated.